everyone, welcome to this Bartlett guest seminar series, Speculative Design. So we discusses the meaning, impact, and applications of speculation in design. And this series is very interdisciplinary and also intercultural because every seminar, we invite guests from all over the world from different disciplines to discuss a sub-theme. For instance, today we have people hooking in from Vienna, America, all the way to China. So the format of the seminar is a roundtable. All of us here in this Zoom is given equal rights to participate. So the floor is open. Everyone is welcome to join the discussion. Just turn on your cameras at any time and start talking. Or you can type your questions in the chat box. So just a heads up before we started that next week we'll be counting down to our last two seminars on Thursday, 24th on speculative asset and speculative urbanism from blockchain, real estate to media and philosophy. So next week we will have 6 guests from all time zones you can imagine, testing the limits to human sleep. And also next Friday, 25th, we have Mariana from Zaha Hadid and Famsi from Futurely to discuss with us the high end and the hybrids in complex geometries. As for today, the seminar invited Laure, Kaiho, and Nero to discuss architectural technologies and the Phygital. They will share their interdisciplinary journey from structural, electrical, civil, and energy engineering and business major to their contemporary investigation in speculative design. So a little introduction to our guest today. Laure Michelon is a creative technologist in Los Angeles and an assistant teacher at SCI-Arc. Previously, she has taught in undergraduate thesis and architectural technologies postgraduate program. So Laure's research and practice focuses on digital simulation and algorithmic mutations with a focused interest in infrastructure systems and fashion. Laure has collaborated with Ishida Ram Studio on various projects, including The Architectural Beast, Hawks Urbanism, and New Campo Marzio. Our second guest, Kaiho, is an assistant professor of architecture at the University of Applied Arts of Vienna, Angewandte, where he's co-creating the Silver Lecture. Previously, he has taught at the UCLA and SCI-Arc, and his research and practice focus on new media, digital simulation, and robotic technologies. He has collaborated with Testa and Weiser, SCI-Arc Robot House, UCLA City Lab, Amalia Ullman, and Paul McCarthy. Last but not least, we have Nero He. He is a design instructor appointed to teach design studios and seminars at the Virginia Tech School of Architecture and Design. Currently, he teaches at SCI-Arc and has been developing workflows in Phygital Construction and Automovision. He's a collaborator of Testa and Weiser. He also worked with Dream the Combine on the constructed installation Hide and Seek for 2018 MoMA PS1 Young Architects program. So we're gonna start soon. Everyone, you're welcome to turn on your cameras anytime so that we have more human agencies, not just talking into a machine. So without further ado, let us welcome our first guest, Laure.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a little early here, so I'm asking for a little patience.
Not little, it's 6 a.m. So.
So really, okay. So first, a little bit about me and my background, which might provide some context for some of the work I've done or might muddle it a little bit more, unsure. So both of my parents are artists. My brother is also an artist. He studied architecture. He also works as a furniture designer. So naturally, after high school, I applied to be an engineer. I also thought about going to Parsons for fashion design because in reality in high school I was interested in math, physics, and fashion, and that was about it. So at Columbia University, I studied civil engineering where my main focus is in structural engineering. And I was also very interested in material engineering and as well as using recycled aggregate in concrete. So post-graduation, after a few different things, I started working at GluMac, which is an MEP firm, an engineering firm in Los Angeles. I started working as an electrical designer, working on Disney Shanghai. I then transferred to be an energy analyst and do energy modeling and sustainability I decided to then go back to school to get a master's in architectural technologies, which is really what started all of this, because that kind of introduced me to machine learning, intelligent agents, how to apply that to both fashion and architecture, as well as world building, and how to kind of also introduce climate engineering. From there, yes, I've been an assistant teacher at SCI-Arc, most recently in the undergraduate thesis studio. I do work for a Ishida Rem studio for Casey, who was my professor at SCI-Arc. I also freelance, being an architectural technologist, creative technologist, AI artist, and researcher. And I think all of those are kind of coming together now to kind of help me inform my practice, although I'm still working out what that even is. But a lot of that kind of comes together in my interests with work. I feel like my version of architecture is really in between architecture and engineering, a hint of art, aspects of machine learning, and because of that, it's a little ADD. But things I'm interested in are really like simulation, algorithmic mutations, using intelligent agents for these designs, machine vision, as well as like large scale infrastructure projects, GANs. I love scaffolding. I love fashion, as well as like random fuzzy objects. Although I do feel like most of my personal work falls into two different categories depending on the project. It's like either large scale climate geoengineering projects that dive into infrastructural systems and design, or fashion. So it's really like running between like superficial aesthetics, aesthetic distortion, as well as like hyperfunctionalism. While working at Ishida Rem Studio, so laggy, but it's a GIF, it's not my fault. I got to help on the Hoax Urbanism project, which was speculating on what cities might be after maybe climate change or extreme city densification. Some of the tests for this project included training Pix-to-Pix on satellite images and the house facade, and then creating new satellite images of a city and generating what the new housing facade might be. We also looked at using GPT-2 for the kind of like Zillow or apartments.com blurb for how you would sell an apartment, running image classifiers to kind of figure out how much these apartments or houses might cost, and just like stacking different neural networks, I mean, for fun, honestly. Another project for Ishida Rem Studio for Casey was a short project that really kind of highlighted bias within the data set and bias within working with some of these neural networks, and just kind of being aware of that. And it's like not architect, non-architect. So I made data sets of a ton of images of architects and a ton of images of not architects, and then ran an image classifier on that. So then I could test people's images against that and kind of see where you stacked up, which obviously means nothing, but it's still fun to think about. Sorry, my cats are going insane in the background. I apologize, you can hear that. But the fun part about this was like Tom Main, who's one of the most famous architects of today, got 7.8% architect, versus my mom, who's an artist, got 94%. I just thought that was fun. And then my last personal project I'm going to talk about is AI Astrologer, which was like my first foray into playing with GPT-2 and text generation, because what better thing to test it on besides horoscopes, because they already, to me, make very little sense. So I thought that was just a fun thing to play with. I think an overarching theme of a lot of my work is also just if I'm having fun with it. So the project I'm going to talk about today is about fashion. So I guess starting out with like why fashion. It's like, yes, I've always been interested in it. And there are a lot of similarities to architecture in talking about form and tectonics, movement and scale. But the difference in scale that fashion has makes it inherently faster and more manageable, especially for some of these tests using these different neural networks. I also kind of love the superficiality that comes with it. It can more easily have more fun and can be more impossible. sometimes. Architecture is also very slow. It takes a lot of time to build things or to get them through plan check. There's an idea that buildings need to be timeless and that the design needs to carry with it the history that it builds upon, whereas I think fashion sometimes tries to break that mold. Architects are also generalists and they get inspiration from everything. They constantly translating from film, fashion, or like literature and art to architecture. So it's not that crazy of a step. At SCI-Arc, I also got to work on in the robot house doing some 3D printing. That was kind of my first cross architecture, fashion, digital, physical project. It was also very tedious. But. Okay, so some current examples of existing digital fashion. Digital fashion and its use of even artificial intelligence is nothing new. For example, like the Fabricant is a digital fashion house that all of their designs exist within the digital sphere. This dress that they designed exists within AR, but is tailor-made for the person that bought it. They're also very interested in blockchain technology, as well as like, I don't know if they've done NFTs, but whatever. They exist in that sphere. Other ideas of digital fashion could be like Julia Corner, her 3D printing work that she's been doing, or some like accidental digital fashion that I find amazing are like these green screen outfits that keep popping up. Like this example is of Melania Trump at some RNC speech that Donald Trump gave, and she wore a green dress. So obviously the internet sphere just went insane and started green screening whenever they wanted onto it. So I would also argue that that is digital fashion, whether or not it was intentional. So an introduction into my project. The project that I'm kind of talking about now explores like implementing machine vision and intelligence to re-examine couture collections and produce speculations on fashion. This work draws inspiration from past runway shows and is reinterpreted in various ways to various levels of success using StyleGAN 2 and CycleGAN mostly. I started the project using CycleGAN and looking at the work of Alexander Mcqueen, specifically his line, The Widows of Culloden, mostly just because I really love that show. And I was just curious about like, if we're applying it to something that has such a strong aesthetic voice, I guess what would come out of it? A lot of this project really was just me being curious about what might happen, and it was fun. The next steps were, trying it on different designers. And so the next one was Iris Van Herpen, which I think her work translated very well because of like a lot of the patterning that comes through. Although none of them have heads and they have a lot of floating limbs. So I decided to try using StyleGAN 2 instead of CycleGAN because, well, I guess I can go. So like CycleGAN is like automatic training of image to image translation models without paired examples. It's like unsupervised training, and it really has a collection of images that trains from like a source and a target domain. Whereas like StyleGAN 2 maps point and latent space to an intermediate latent space and then uses an intermediate latent space to control style at each point in the generator model, and then introduces noise as a source of like variation at each point. So StyleGAN 2, I in my mind, like a lot of these models, like CycleGAN is a little fuzzier. It's a little more out there, whereas StyleGAN is really coming towards the data set. So one of the first ones I tried was shoes from Nike. I also ran it on, this is when I was kind of playing with the formatting of the data set to see what it came out of. This is Comme des Garçons. And of course, Rick Owens, because he's one of my favorites. So it's not like you combine two designers and then you'll get some kind of like interesting aesthetic or perfect blend out of it, because it just doesn't work that way. It's more because you're generating so many images, it's like the endless potential of what you can get out of this and how you can interpret it, how you can curate it, and what you do with that. So like the design of even just training the data set is probably like the most critical component of these neural networks and working with them, because they're really trained to recognize patterns with the aim to apply it to whatever future data you feed it. Obviously, sometimes this shows bias that you maybe don't want to highlight. You know, specifically in the news, I think so often we talk about like racial, gender, and class bias because these neural networks really, they feed back and distort such bias. So how that applies to this fashion work is like you get these like zombie-esque or, you know, vestiges of human body parts. Like these, I guess, mistakes I find very fun. Like the third leg pops up quite often because the model is walking, or misaligned body parts, or missing altogether. The neural network also has the tendency to kind of learn like too much, or like fixate on something very specific that you don't necessarily want it to. So like in terms of specific patterns, like this is one of my first tests for Rick Owens, and it like really focused on the negative space around the model and the fashion. And so then tried to bring that back into the center pointed focus, which was not my intention. So it's kind of necessary to like drop some of the results in order to make the recognition, or to make the output be something similar or like closer to what you wanted. Another thing like similar to overfitting is like apophenia. So like where the neural network sees patterns that aren't there, or like generates patterns, I mean, like that you don't want. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But I think my biggest problem with playing with StyleGAN too is that some of the results are just too familiar, or like almost too realistic. So I had to drop a lot of these in the data set as well. But so what's next? Taking 2D images and trying to get them into 3D. So obviously every image that comes out of StyleGAN or CycleGAN is a 2D image. So in order to translate that into 3D, automatically my brain first went to pattern making, like how clothing is actually created. And so it was kind of a speculation about like what was just designed in this image, and like how would I reconstruct that garment? Like what even is that garment, especially in terms of like something like this. So like I just kind of treated them as a draft or a sketch to create something new. The step after that was then to enter the patterns, or like redraw the patterns in a software like Clo3D, which allows you to like simulate in real time how that garment would come together and fall on an avatar with varying degrees of success. The intention of this part of the project was then to actually physically construct some of these garments, but with COVID, I don't really have space in my apartment for a dress form and a lot of these materials. So that was kind of put on hold for a minute. And instead, I started playing with like different ways to get these images into 3D. So enter PAF UHD Facebook's kind of like high level pixel aligned function in order to like digitize someone's. Like, how do you take an image of someone and then create a digital 3D model of them? This also ran with like varying levels of success, because naturally that data set that it was trained on was crisp images of people against like very mute backgrounds. And so naturally, with something that's a little fuzzier that comes out of StyleGAN or CycleGAN, you have these like traces of what was behind. So like the runway here came with it, as well as like a lot of floating pieces around. Or sometimes it'll get like parts of it, you know, really, really well, and then just kind of like explode the left leg. These, again, were just kind of giving me an opportunity to play with this neural network and see how it works or what I can do with it, or realistically what I need to do data set wise in order to get something out of it that I might like more. So some of them work very well and some of them don't. I think this one's one of my favorite because I love the colors. So many of these, you know, avatars, images, fashion designs are really like, they look distorted or mutated, which I love because it creates an inherent sense of tension because it is just a little bit other or a little different than what we're used to. I'm also going to steal a quote that I overheard John Cooper say at SCI-Arc. But he said, with a GAN, you have two options, incest and cannibalism. You can either breed architecture and culture or consume it and eat it and erase it. And after he said that, I, to be honest, can't stop thinking about that in terms of my own work. Like, which category do I fall into? Or is this just breeding incest? Is this more of the same, or have I done something new? So I guess I just love that. But seeing these kind of like fashion images interpreted through machine vision really like highlight the difference in perception between human and machine. Like, yes, machine vision can like see things that we can't, or interpret images in a way that maybe we weren't prepared for because of our inherent biases. Like, yes, I trained all of these on data sets I created, so my bias definitely shows through, but in what way? I think that it constantly identifies interesting patterns and perspectives because it doesn't have your traditional human perception, isn't really restricted by our existing forms of aesthetic and capacities and inclinations. But then because I take those, curate the output, and edit them, you know, I am imparting my aesthetics and design choices on it. So looking to what's next, at least I was like working on rigging some of them, although rigging in any software is not that much fun. So I kind of put that on hold for a while. But like, this way of bringing things into 3D is really driven by like algorithms of, or at least for me right now, and especially at this project, is driven by algorithms of brute force approximation. So it's like these neural networks are used to design many differently biased and like new and fuzzy options that can be curated, refined, and tailored based on what you want. But like, none of them have the preferences of Anna Wintour, I guess, unless she would be training her own. So that's all I really have today. I'm gonna end with a quote from Sylvia Wynter, or it's like, once noting that abrupt change doesn't just magically come about, that the seeds of seemingly abrupt change have been planted and cultivated for some time. So perhaps in this light, we can see our role as contributing to a setting of such seed beds for hypothetical worlds to come. I think that's better than any conclusion I would give. So I'm going to end there.
Thank you so much. That was very concise and short. And it seems like, you know, one just haven't gotten enough and then you just ended it. We wanted to see more. So I guess we can also reserve that for the roundtable afterwards. But before that, let us welcome Kaiho, our second panelist with new haircut.
Hello, I'm gonna share my
Hi.
screen. And
Yes, we
amazing,
see it.
amazing lecture, Laurie. I'm really can't wait to discuss some of the things with you. I have some questions I marked, but I'm sure in the kind of the slides I'm sharing today, there will be some sort of common interests. So, okay, you guys see the slides well? Okay, so I think for today I'm gonna talk more about ideas and thoughts, and share some of the images that relates to the larger agenda of the Phygitality. This is something we've been kind of working on for several years, and we don't have a solid kind of definition yet, but I would say through kind of this kind of cloud images, or through this kind of multiple ideas, this what the concept we're trying to convey would be more clear. So I think in terms of the layers of Phygitality, I'm going to separate into 4 different aspects, or 4 different layers. The first one I want to talk about is about analog and digital representation. When I talk about this idea, I always start with Jeff Koons' arousing curiosity. This is from his new painting series, where he's trying to, in a certain way, not just collage, but also juxtapose or aligning objects or images from different sources. So in this one, you can see there are bitmap images, there are rendered sausages, there are pictures of the balloon, there's also Gasper, the 2D kind of line drawing. There are also strokes and also photo of underwear. And then he's trying to put all these things together in a different approach. If we compare this to, let's say, Rauschenberg, right? He's trying to create relationship of different objects. Through one object, you see the reflection of another one. By laying them on top of each other, you can start to establish a new correlation of parts. And then the idea is bringing us to try and think about how we can work with resources or objects from 2 environments, the digital and analog environment. So this Louis Vuitton Spring Summer 2021 collection from Virgil Abloh is about having the characters flying around the city to convey a certain storytelling, and also work with their the objects or the garments from their series. So the idea is not just to simply put 2 environments together, but also try to think about how one thing can start to contaminate the other thing. I would say this is still the early kind of the the outside layer of the Phygitality, right? This is just to simply put 2 environments together and see what could happen. So in this Maison Margiela Spring 2019 Couture collection, the representation of the clothes is to merge the background, the reflective floor with the garments themselves. Like you can see the blue, this looks like a mesh model, right? Mesh model from the computer is being placed in the background as well as on the clothes, and the other strokes which are kind of from the strokes or these kind of pipes, they are kind of implying a certain digitality, but they are also kind of escaping from that environment to jump on the pattern as well as being separated in the background. So with this kind of multiple representation and multiple objects, and putting them together, you can start to establish a connection or think about a certain degree of relationship, not just visually, but also conceptually, how we can start to draw things together. This idea is so apparent, not just in fashion, but also in animation and movie, right? I think Wes Anderson's Eyes of Dogs, they are using the stop motion with green screen, as well as digital animation to convey certain sceneries. In this one, you see the Oliver Larrick's project. He's trying to take the ready-made objects, ready-made sculptures usually, by doing photogrammetry or 3D scanning, and then to reproduce this sculpture in the physical format. But in the meanwhile, he's also trying to multiply the objects used to investigate different materiality or different texture, but also try to put them into pieces and connect them together. In terms of art and sculpture, Austin Lee is a young kind of artist from Yale. He graduated from Yale. He's looking at how to create some sort of object format with VR. So from this one, you can see the sculptural form and how the colors are being applied is from the VR painting tool, where the brush is being controlled not with the gravity, but in a three-dimensional form that can fly in space. And through the hand sculpturing, he can also control the thickness of the strokes, as well as applying with certain color and texture. But the next thing he did is to try to recreate this object in a physical environment, where the idea is to translate the three-dimensional model, fix with the scale, and then use digital fabrication tools such as CNC and milling tool to create the sculptural pieces, and then apply with an airbrush in a way that matches with the original texture map in the digital environments. What you see here is a kind of a photography of architectural model. If I'm sure this is you guys are familiar with this project. This is a rooftop of Le Corbusier's the Unité d'Habitation in France. This is just pieces on the rooftop. So this image is captured in a SCI-Arc robot house, and try to think about how architectural objects, in this case models, can be viewed in a way that is also non-human. Because this is a linear elevational view, and usually it is very hard to capture without distortion, because from the perspective of the lens, you have certain degree of distortion, and the idea is to use robots to capture piece by piece and do a long kind of panning from left to right, and then put hundreds of images together in a very finely treated way. But while capturing, they are being projected with a digital texture that were generated from the outline of those model pieces. So what you see here is something you can never see from your own eyes, because while the camera is moving, the projector where are applying a kind of light, or we say texture map to divide the white model is also moving with the camera. So in real life, you can only see in one part of the model being projected, but with the robotic technology and its precision, we are able to think about how a long linear sequence can be perceived. And then the idea is also extended to how objects are being placed in different environment, and then how this digital and analog representation, when put them together, what kind of idea they can convey. Of course, this is not, this is not a certain design strategy yet, but by thinking about this through other disciplines, from art, from movie, from fashion, we are trying to start to making some sense by putting parts together. So which goes to the second layer. I think this is also would be a keyword we're going to talk about in the roundtable discussion, is to see things in a non-human way, or machine vision. Peter Steiro has produced this this movie series, like a short movie about how not to be seen, and she's trying to think about how a person can disappear from the media or from the camera for a few seconds. This also respond to one of the question from, I guess, from Andy Warhol, is that people can be famous for 15 minutes, but how can people disappear for 15 minutes in this world? Because we are being perceived in a way visually with camera, but also large data by tracking, and as well as you are being profiled in a certain way by the big companies like Google or Facebook. That I'm pretty sure for all of us, we have our own profile that they kind of describing what qualities do you have and what kind of advertisement should we target to this person. But how people are being seen by the machine or being reproduced by the machine is an interesting question when we think about space. In here, this is an image from the Microsoft Mixed Reality Capture Studio with a hologram. In order to reproduce, I don't even know how to describe the person in here, whether this is whether this is a digital format or, but it also has certain analogicity in this case, a mixed reality, and that makes us to think about how we can take this idea to think the connection or the part-to-whole relationship in architecture. That is just one small kind of distraction from the larger umbrella. So in here, what you see is Jim Sterling's Bibliothèque de France project, which didn't win. And the model, I think this is the model from CCA in Montreal. The thing we did at SCI-Arc with Devin Weiser, as well as my two collaborators, is to think about how these model pieces can be seen by camera or can be seen by robotic approach. And to start, to start with process, we need to understand how robots move, because they move in a certain limitation, but they also have a very kind of even aggressive movement that allow you to see things in a certain way. It can do the rotation, it can do the panning, it can do the multiple movements. I would say that that is both a constraint, but also an opportunity to set up a framework for us to understand how the objects are being seen in a certain environment. So we have 5 robots in the robot arms at SCI-Arc. As you can see, we have 4 over there and 1 is holding the camera. And in this kind of film, you see the objects, they are kind of moving in a certain behavior, right? They're moving within a certain restriction, but they are also kind of freed from their original physical limitation to recompose into certain position or organization. So I think what leads to us is with the idea of analog and digital, and then to the machine vision. I think this leads to us back to points. What does it mean is when we capture or digitalize objects in our daily life or architecture or people, what we are creating is point cloud models. I think that's an important kind of idea for us to think about objects with capturing technologies or sensing technologies, that the couch or the bed or the table, they are beyond their, how we would conceive they are as a tabletop and four legs. They are also existing as points, right? At least for the machine. And each point, they have specific data to document their position or their depth or their temperature. And the objects, they are being composed by multiple points with their data information. This is an example of how architecture can be documented by points. This is from the pizza in Italy. To think about how the depth, how the frontality, or how the form can be represented in another way. So we no longer read this as a facade or front or like a massing, but we read this as point cloud with different information. LiDAR technology, which are installed in self-driving cars as well as iPhone Pros, are opening up this idea to the next kind of integratable connection with the iPhone or with the self-driving cars or with the robots. The next application that are connecting with this should also talk to their own language, which is the language of points. Here is an example from Ken Museth, an employee from DreamWorks, to analyze how the voxels can host as much information as possible in order to reduce the heaviness of the animated models. But also, when we open the discussion to points, we also start another, in Timothy Morton's way, hyper objects that things are unknowable, like the COVID virus, or all the pieces in the universe that we cannot fully understand. Also, dark ecology in this way, just like the Seaspiracy document from the Netflix, how the way we are consuming food is infecting the whole ecology. Though when we go back to point, we are opening another dark ecology to understand in a fundamental way how pieces or architectures are being composed together. So this is not a new kind of topic for architecture. Greg Lin was looking at this by integrating motion and velocity and force in this Port Authority Triple Bridge Gateway project in 1994, to think about how to use physical simulation to analyze force and how that can convey into certain architectural forms. And this has been impacting the way for people to think about architecture in a different way. Sejima, if you have read the recent El Corky from Sana, she was representing a drawing by dots, because I cannot find this one online. That's why I put one of the project from Sana. But the way to understand architecture in her way is by drawing things not with line, not with block, but with dots. So she was doing this practice by start drawing architecture in dots as well as the nature around that to open up the possibility of merging, think about the idea of merging the building with the nature or make the walls disappear. But when we move back to the points, what we are thinking is maybe they are not still points, right? If we are describing a still object, they are still points. But the difference between points and a line or points to a massing is that points are flexible. They have the ability to move, which opens up another kind of an idea to operate is simulation. Simulation has changed the way we think architecture in a contemporary way vastly. Start by simulating texture, by simulating physical or analog object in a digital way. Architects has been looking at texture map by looking at how the digital model can be enhanced, also by borrow the concept from or borrow the techniques from animation industry, like looking at how the XGen or Maya, or I don't even know what we are using nowadays, like Blender, they can help us to kind of help us to think about how form or space or materiality can be generative. So architects, they also think about how simulation can work with material. Like this one is from Jeff Hastad, Paper House, to simulate how the movement of the paper can be digitalized. And to also think about how the light, the digital light can be rendered. Or to think about how the models, how the analog model can, in a certain way, reduce enough information so it would go back to have a certain degree of digitality. But this is from our own interpretation of Thomas Demann's art pieces. But the simulation in the recent years is also moving towards the behavior, or moving towards how behavior can be connected with AI, because gaming softwares is like GAN or Unity, Unreal, and Cinema 4D are being kind of used in the earlier research to think about how this gamification can open up or extend certain agenda from the previous discourse. And to think about how this sort of dynamic can be represented through form, composition, or organization. So in here, what you see is a kind of a simulation of movement, where through the movement of the table, where they are wandering, you see the purple chairs that are trying to avoid the table. And from this relationship, you can start to read how things would behave in a certain digital model. And this is one of our projects for the Shenzhen Biennale in 2019, where the idea was to populate the digital agents based on how the cameras are capturing in the exhibition center, to have a digital duel in a space. So when you walk in front of the exhibition, the camera would capture your profile and then generate another digital agent in this game environment. So it's about to use this as an environment to think about how people are being seen by the camera while you are looking at the camera, to reverse this kind of dichotomy through simulation and then duplication of the digital twins. So I think for my slides, they are more abstract and conceptual. I hope this could open up some interesting discussions for the roundtable later.
Thank you so much. Yes, for sure. This is so interesting that you managed to tie everything from art to science into architecture. And then we also have like an update of something very fundamental in architecture, like point, line, and plane, and also mereology that can go back to philosophy in Greeks, which is like part to whole relationship. So for sure, I look forward to the roundtable. So before that, we have our last panelist, Nero. Warm welcome. Clap.
Hello, everyone.
Everybody,
Hello.
you're welcome to turn on your cameras. Don't be shy. Yeah, hi,
Let
Nero.
me share my screen. Hello,
Yes,
hello,
please.
everyone. So are you able to see my screen, right?
Yes, perfect.
Amazing. Well, just 1 second. Okay. It's still very much early here in LA. It's almost 7 o'clock. And hi, everyone. I'm very grateful to be invited to this semester at Bartlett. So thank you for having me provide. And my name is Nero Chenxuan He, and I'm a design faculty at Virginia Tech. As a collaborator of Tessa and Weiser, I'm also co-teaching SCI-Arc at the moment. And it is truly exciting to share my work and have conversation alongside my colleagues, collaborators, and really close friend, Laure and Kaiho. So let's begin. I don't really classify my work as speculative, to be honest. One reason might be what provides you have mentioned weeks ago on our roundtable prep conversation, that there's no really direct translation in Chinese to understand the idea of speculative design. Another reason is, to some degree, I'm a bit opposed to the idea of classifying myself as a designer. Or as a designer in the third millennium, I'm more on the curatorial side now. So my work has been strongly affected by the current quarantine life, in which my computer almost becomes the only interface to architecture design. I do have an urge of seeking a physical construction format for architecture design, but it has to be surprised and translated to a digital construction. A workflow to curate a digital mountain with parts physically connected through simulation will be introduced later. Through the lens of a computer, one can experience from a non-human centric perspective. That being said, I classify myself as digital camera enthusiast and professional mountain constructor. All right, so let me walk you through how I create my digital mountain and receive a mountain. So to understand my work, we need to get to know that we're very much existing in the world of the big flat now, where its cultural production is totally flat. The information we make and share travels through media that lack hierarchy or centrality. There's no principal authority, no recognized attributor, and neither a limit nor a horizon. It has primarily changed our relationship with time and space, which also makes all existed shareable asset equally accessible. So I have made an asset. Found object from the internet donated objects from peers, 3D scanned object from my daily life, and last but not least, parts from my past projects are all added to this asset pool. So this process is not selective to make all objects fitting the same genre, rather embracing the coexistence of differences. It is a digital way of upcycling, but with resistance to synthesize, or we can say it's with the resistance of pixel blending. They're all alone together without a hierarchy. Since I have mentioned upcycling, since I have mentioned upcycling, let's get into it. The process of upcycling refers to the reusing of discard materials in such a manner as to create a product of higher quality or increase the value and allowing them to exchange from the beginning with. And my upcycling techniques has the phygital quality as well as what Kaiho just mentioned. The upcycled material can be understood with the logic of a computer science. So if you look into this diagram on the left, you can see this idea of I'm trying to have my asset pool bridging between the physical and digital format, which allow them to have exchange. So a digital light source can be used as a separator to separate different materials, but within the same object. And sometimes a digital camera can be used as a projector to project some other quality materials on the same object. So if we keep looking at the example I made before, material example I made before, we can see some existing example I've already created. A 3D scanned beef slices with the digital layers of mold on. And over here, we see a real life material changed by camera projections. And the material is very much interrelated to the coexisting environment at the same time. And here on the left, we see a material with the additional material that have a volume, but not a 2D image slapped on the mesh. It follows the physical manufacture steps simulated in the digital environment. And for the material on the right, which with the collaboration of Laure, we have generated this material also have a 3D-dimensional volume, but it is very much based on the 2D displacement map slapped on the mesh. So it is intended to blur the line between physical and digital material, form, and physics. Architecture design in phygital upcycling is no longer about foreseeing the end result, but creating a workflow to discover a new product that is defined by how one utilize and misuse a digital tool. And all right, after understanding how I manipulate with all my assets, let's talk about how we construct a mountain. So responding to the world of big flat now, stored object can be generated through curation techniques after the form and texture of each object being modified through different manners. Accumulative process is snowballing from 1 to infinite. Every object in the mountain is alone, but they are interrelated. They have very much physical and material and digital relationship with one another. And stored objects have architectural dimension, but also they're forever changeable. Just speed it up over here. There we go. So the general scene is created with a physical simulation. A live stream interface is set up. This is focusing on object manipulation and the physical construction, which provides an exchange between the back of the house accumulation with the front of the house presentation. In the interface, one can see what is the object, the source of the object, the material treatment, the simulation tag, and what is the gravity direction. So the mountain, you can see on your right, just like any other real geological mountain, it is not a finite set, but an ever-expanding world that will be growing over time. Geologic, here I quote from Baron Bartlett, geologic in nature, it represents a partial architecture embedded, which information from many points of origin and melds their trees to find completeness in the round. And now we can talk about how we see the mountain with Automavision. Now you're seeing crazy camera works, but I will get into it later in the next chapter. And here we go. Let's talk about Automavisions. So in recent Prada and even Gucci shows, random cameras are similarly capturing different juxtaposition, which is very much similar with the idea of Automavision. Automavision is this cinematic technique invented by the Finnish director Laure Michelon He, which is using a uncontrolled computer system to see things that is not within a human-centric perspective. When you Google falling water, you see almost exactly the same perspective of this one building, and mostly posted by architecture-related website. But if you put your location on falling water on Instagram, and you see real people's posts on this location, you understand this building have even more layers and dimension to it. I think it's quite funny, huh? As like architects, we are being trained to have a certain gaze. So the question is, after architecture school, are we freer to look at the world, or we are more selective to capture the views which we think it is architectural?
Automavision was a reaction against the handheld camera, because the handheld camera I used a lot. I'm very happy for the handheld camera because I'm a person who really enjoys logic, and the handheld camera, I can understand the logic behind it. I can see that a handheld camera can be a person that is really watching, and it was very nice for me to come around the problem of framing, because in my mind there's not a lot of logic in framing, but pointing, as we called it with the camera, there was a lot of logic in that. Some of the films that I liked very much was screwball comedies, and all these films were mainly fixed cameras. And then I got the idea of using a computer to help me to kind of randomize the framing.
To put it simply, Automavision is a random placement of the camera. The director does not control where the camera is and where it's pointing. To make it work for actually making a movie like this, we put some restrictions on how random the camera movement is.
First of all, it gave me the freedom not to.
So that's basically what Automavision is. Which is this quasi-autonomous camera motions that capturing this non-human centric perspective to give us architects or even the general public a fresh eye of looking at things that we already know. As what we have right now, we have this Phygital platform aggregated mountain set already. Let's see what we can get out of it using Automavision techniques.
From the side, a whole range.
セイリン寺には文字の書かれた壁板がある。それによると、
From the end, a single peak.
両サイドから全体を見渡し、両端から一つの頂点を見る。
Far,
遠くのもの、
near,
近くのもの、
high,
高いもの、
low.
低いもの、
No two parts alike.
どれ一つとして同じものはない。
Why can't I tell the true shape of Liu Shan?
ではなぜ私はルサンの真の形を説明することができないのであろうか。それは今まさに
Because I myself
私自身が山の中にいるからであった。
It's dim beyond the threshold. Cluttered curves crowd the front, a forbidding mouth to a cave that only hints at what lies ahead.
周囲が照らされ、明るく透き通った空間と出会う。太陽からの光の侵入が、そこが外であることを教えてくれる。
Caged in on one side, packed with such pressure that some parts fused while others sheared off in a landslide and now litter the foot of the cliff.
もっともっともっと近づいて見てみると、物の粗さや物の滑らかさといった手に触るすべてのものが見えてくる。
The light is brightest along the spine-like ornaments of the frame, contrasting with the dark shadows cast on the space beyond.
周囲の静けさとは裏腹に、水流がうねる大地を流れ渡り、地下へ地下へと浸透していく。谷の奥深くを覗いてみると、優しく平和な色に映し出される光の方へ飛び込んでみたくなってしまう衝動に駆られる。
Lumped together without order or hierarchy, they all pass through each other. Leaves, through plastic, through ink, through fur. No one reacts to anyone else. They're all alone together.
季節の移ろいの到来を巨大な塊の中からたった一枚の葉っぱが教えてくれている。秋はもう来ていると。
The bright blue light reappears in everything, filling out the frame. Here, it's a sharp and vibrant sheen, washing out details with its cold, flat haze.
それらは目に見えない結合力によってつなぎ合わさっている。孤立しているが引っ張り合う。そしてそれらの落ちる影さえも。
They all seem to be facing one direction, standing on an edge, looking out somewhere beyond the edge of frame, beyond the cluster, beyond the line past which there are no other objects, just empty green.
さらに奥へ奥へと進んでいくと、一見すべてが守られたかのような、丁寧に配置されたような空間と出くわす。
Everything seems to bleed and blend. It's too cluttered. There's too much to take in. There's no end to it.
山の頂上にたどり着くと、その先に山の端っこを確認することができる。しかし同時に、ここから抜け出す出口がないことを知ってしまうのだ。
This is a mountain.
So what I've just saying is randomly generated by the technique of Automavision, looking at the mountain we just seen, and it is arbitrarily long, which is intentional. But this could be go longer and longer, which can make it an actual film because I don't have to do anything. The Automavision will see things for me. And my two really close friends, Nero Chenxuan and Phygital He, are reading the space as a person who never seen this before, with two different cultural backgrounds and give it a human touch to it. So what I want to say is from the beginning of the film, it says from the side a whole range, from the end a single peak, far near high low, no two parts alike. Why can't I tell the true shape of mountain Lu? Because I myself is in the mountain. This is a Chinese poem I've recited from a really young age, and suddenly it all made perfect sense to me. Because there is not a composer or a conductor, but a system outside myself created this film. I have just presented. The environment is very much instructable. but the camera makes me be in a situation I never put myself into. And us human can poetize with our cultural background and experience, but not rationalize it. So the camera becomes a quasi-evaluation tool to unveiling the spatial cement. This project is also a realization that we very much started at the middle of the architecture stream, which have a lot of given information already. So focusing on how to recreate and receive assets seems rational. So my new focus after this project is using this quasi-autonomous camera Automavision work as an active way of curating new forms of architecture. And using Automavision and post-production techniques, architecture information is relocated, doubled, deleted, bent, and even inverted. This is a workflow I designed for Duncan Weiser's vertical here in SCI-Arc, where Kaiho was also co-teaching with us at the same time. And here is I quote from really famous film director Yasujiro Ozu. He stated, "The only true thing is whatever is filmed. Nothing happened beyond the image." So by understanding the camera photons, digital camera photons, we could use Automavision to extract information segments and blur the line between what is subjective and what is objective. And this is my attempt. I called this project the form of dark chambers, which similar stuff will be coming in my own seminar taught in Virginia Tech. So I believe there's much more to come in the world of Phygitality and Automavision. Here it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Big thanks to our professional mountain constructor. I also remember when I first got in touch with Nero, I was like, okay, what are you? Are you like a mountain climber or something? Like, are you very sports oriented? And now I understood why. So we have entered the section of the roundtable. So as with every seminar, I will begin a roundtable with a small paragraph that I read. But before I read it, I will post a question first. So the first question is like, where are we going? But then before our panelists try to answer this, so first a little paragraph to shape the context. So where are we going is a small paragraph written by Penelope Dean, who is the editor to Flat Out magazine. It's a very interesting magazine, just a little shout out. So here it goes. If there's one thing for architects and designers to recoup today, it's their claim on the future. Not the future as a utopia, such as ideal cities, crystal cathedrals, or master plans, nor is it technological fetish, animated buildings, responsive walls, or whatnot, or infinite flexibility, or big data, or visionary images, but the future as a cultural question, a social perspective, an intellectual proposition, an unthinkable alternative to the present. So the future has sunk into a swamp and given over to computer automation and information system experts. The future was also taken hostage by government bureaucrats like Margaret Thatcher's Design for Profit campaign and science fiction writers, singer-songwriters, business gurus, or whatnot. So sure, architects have dallied in the genre of futuristic image since the digital revolution around 1993, but they did so only after the business technology design experiment had fully colonized architecture and according to the terms set by this infiltration. As it turns out that these architectural forays into celebratory techno-futures amounted to little no more than academic niche discourses that were merely harbingers of an updated present. That is the nicheification of all aspects of architectural culture, history, exhibition, practice, research, and discourse in ways that are isomorphic with current political agendas, social movements, and the market. So in the current landscape of perpetual differentiation, concepts of the future have contracted into what is simply new or different within the present. So trapped with this self-fulfilling prophecy of the feedback loop, architects and its critics, for that matter, have lost their hubris either to preserve or to replace what exists, settling instead for designs that are adaptive, responsive, and predictive. So they have abandoned the future for the ameliorative. But we deserve, or at least desire, a radiant future, not just a resilient one. So that's a really big critique to maybe a lot of us who are actually practicing in speculative design or not practicing in speculative design. And the question was, where are we going? That is beyond just computational or political or market driven, but is at the same time historical, cultural, and ontological. And this is the kind of image that he was showing as a radiant future that puts together stuff. So, any response to start the round table about where we are going? Tough question.
I'll start because it's a non-answer. But I'm